Endol kake mofaseda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online, a spaceship game. If you're watching us live on Twitch TV, we have a podcast version on talkinginstations.com. We also have a YouTube hub with videos on demand at youtube.com/talkinginstations, all one word. Today we have episode 218. Yes, we've done 218 of these Sunday shows now.
Damn.
I know, really. I'm your host, Carneros from The Bastion, and I'm joined by two hosts and two guests today. So let's introduce them and give you a chance to hear their voices. It's very helpful if you're on the podcast version. First, we have Elise Randolph from Pandemic Legion.
Hey, how's it going? Very happy. I can't believe we've done 218.
It's 218 Sunday shows so far.
It's crazy.
And we have McLeod from The Initiative.
Hey, guys. It's
Accent, you'll get used to it.
Yep.
And then, okay, let me introduce our guest. This is a little bit trickier, though, okay? First, we have Makoto Priano. He is the CEO of Itsukami Zaino Hyperspatial Inquiries Limited, and he is the coordinator emeritus of the Arataka Research Consortium.
Nicely done on those names. And hey, I'm Mac. Mac for short. That works perfectly well for this.
Excellent, wonderful.
That won't get confusing at all.
McLeod and Makoto. Okay, yeah, I get it. And then I'd like to introduce you to Dutch Gunner, who is the CEO and founder of Circle of Abyss, and also the FC of the fleets of Arataka Research Consortium.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dutch Gunner, and I'm the main FC. I do have other FCs as well, and I think we're going to be busy in the next coming weeks and months.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining us today. If you are unfamiliar with the work of the Arataka Research Consortium, it's amazing. These folks look deeply into the questions of our day with regard to hostile and benevolent alien invaders and contact. They look into the lore, they look into the science, they look into the practical application and response. They are what we have in New Eden today in terms of expertise on the Triglavian menace.
And my favorite little tidbit about them that was kind of just released not too long ago in interviews and stuff, CCP actually were so impressed that they thought they had a leak because these guys were so good at deconstructing the mysteries that they were throwing out at Capsuleer.
That's amazing.
So I will say, when it comes to the Triglavian primer, in the first place, all credit to the folks who have been involved in that writing project. In the second case, a lot of the time, a lot of what we're looking at, like, it's already there, like the breadcrumbs are all laid out, and people go, oh, hey, this is probably the pattern. But with the primer and similar projects, some of the folks with ARC and the greater community, we go, okay, well, let's prove it and prove that it's not the other thing or that thing and so on. And it's just, it's taking that theory and validating it or disproving it. God, it sounds like science that way.
Well, plenty of times it's just somebody having a bit of a mind wave like, wait, what about this? Or shouldn't we be looking at that? And that triggers other people to look into it. And then all of a sudden, a single question or a single line can lead to some amazing findings.
27
More history about the Arataka Research Consortium. You guys didn't form... You've been in existence longer than Triglavians have been a name in New Eden. Tell us about your history.
So ARC actually originally didn't even exist as ARC. So it sort of spun out of, honestly, like the very beginnings of the Drifter storyline. The point at which arcs started to form was with the first Drifter Hive dive in like June of 2015, and it's like, okay, let's get into the hives, let's see what we see, because it just hit TQ, and there ended up being about like maybe a dozen of us in various corporations, and that actually ended up being our first moment of sort of fame, where we found the corpse of Helan Tukos, who's a story character involved with Arak Jalan, and we can go into that at length. And some of us ended up with bounties on our heads that basically totaled 200 old plex, which is a not inconsiderable amount. And then fast forward, basically, like we kept doing the stuff, and then eventually it's like, okay, well, we're a bunch of corporations. Let's, we're the Consortium. And then CCP came up with, or rather announced the Upwell Consortium. And it's like, oh, well, we can't be the, just be the Consortium. I mean, there are two consortiums now that get confusing, and there's no way we could, brand ourselves and, displace Upwell. So that's the point at which the name ARC, or the Arataka Research Corporation, came about, and we've been doing tinfoily stuff with like sleepers and drifters and the Kyonoke plague in 2017 and so on, and everything since. So yeah, 5 years and running.
Well, you do great work. The research documents are amazing. The videos are absolutely, like, they mess with your mind that it might be, does this come from CCP or not? It's brilliant.
I remember the first time I saw the ARC videos, I genuinely was like that kind of. I thought it was a CCP production. It was so good. You guys do exceptional work.
Yeah, all credit. When it comes to the discourse, there are a few team members on that. Primarily, it's Cerulean Voth does our audio and is also one of the voices of the newscasters for the discourse, and Jarrett Victorian does the composition work and a lot of the filming. We also have Elinari Rodan as as another newscaster voice, and at various points we've been helped with, like Corin Moore has done our intro splashes, Nomestrov has done some excellent video work for us, Uriel Paradisiente of Nietzsche has done like some video work and some graphics work, and La Siorana Rask has also done some voice work, and all of them are excellent and do honestly professional grade stuff. It's been amazing.
Speaking of CCP, they tweeted earlier today and said the Triglavian invasion of EVE Online is about to come to a head, and is set. Actually, they tweeted a quote from Massively OP. The Triglavian invasion of EVE Online is about to come to a head, and is set to make shockwaves across all of New Eden. And then they commented, "It seems that the forces of the Triglavians will change New Eden forever. Are you ready?" So we here at Talking in Stations would like to ask the audience, are you ready? And we're here to help you get ready. So let's start by asking our guests here, what should we be doing to get ready? What's going to happen this week? And I'd like to warn the audience that today's episode is going to include both fact and conjecture. Some things are not known, but we're going to do our best to give you our insights and guesses for what's going to happen.
So I think I'll be taking the lead on this one, as this is more my field of expertise. I'm just going to start with the most important thing, and that's don't panic. There's hobo leaks, there's a lot of speculation, and people are just looking at bits and pieces of upcoming mechanics, but we're only seeing bits and pieces. We don't know how they work, we don't know how they interact, but people are theory crafting, tinfoiling, and they're accepting a lot of theories as fact. And they start to get in a bit of a panic. What if this? What if that? So first of all, don't panic. Second of all, based on how things happened in the past, there's going to be a kickoff on the 26th. So it's not like everything is likely to hit at 100% of the content right from the get-go. We've seen it with...
You said the 26th. That's 2 days from when we're recording this podcast.
Yes.
Holy cow. Okay, keep going.
If you look back at chapter 2, that was where they moved away from the World Arc Proving Grounds. They went to the current observatory flashpoints, but that didn't happen right away. They first introduced a different site where they introduced us to these are the stellar accelerators. And then those got transferred into the observatory flashpoints. So it's not like it's the 26th. Here you go, all the content from the get-go. There's going to be a bit of a run-up.
What, of course, that run-up looks like and how disruptive CCP wants to be in the first go of it really is going to depend, honestly, almost as much on like marketing objectives as the story. So we can really only theorize, as Dutch Gunnar said.
Okay. Well, let's start with what we know. And one of the things we know is that we've been told that Forsaken Fortress is going to be, we'll call that we'll just giggle and call that a new software update coming out from Upwell Consortium to help with the obsolescence of aging structures in space.
It's an interesting way of looking.
Should go live on Tuesday. and at that point, the timeline is ending soon for structures. Some of them will go into abandoned state, and then they'll lose asset safety. And people are all across New Eden for the last couple weeks. People have been taking down structures in large numbers. I wish we had that behind the scenes. Yeah,
it's led to some pretty big fights. I know the Imperium had a huge fight over 2 keep stars in the tribute area. A lot of like death happened there, including one of the keep stars being hilariously like destroyed by accident. As the Imperium tried to scoop it, Horde found out. Imperium was like, "Hey, I've got an idea. We'll use our Horde spy to pick up this keep star, so Horde won't shoot their own character." Which kind of worked for a while. It picked up the keep star, but then an Imperium pilot said, "Hey, there's a freighter that's a bad guy with the keep star. I'm going to go bubble it." And he accidentally bubbled his own spy, and it led to like a big fight, and the keep star eventually died in that freighter. But that was only like part 1. There's another one going on. There's been a whole bunch of these pretty sizable skirmishes over Fortizars and keep stars and other Upwell structures as they're being taken down to prepare for the Forsaken Fortress.
And for those who aren't aware what it's all about, currently, if you deploy a Upwell structure, there's 2 modes. It's powered and it's low powered. And after the update, if it's been 7 days and in those 7 days no fuel has been consumed, it goes into abandoned state. And in abandoned state, if it's blown up, everything that's in it will drop as loot. Compared to when it's in low power mode, it's going to go into asset safety, with the exception, I think, of all the materials that are being used in industry and research, but those should be cut off as soon as it hits low powered regardless.
And am I right, or did I just have a weird dream that Faction Fortizars, the ones that used to be player-owned stations, but that got swapped over to Upwell structures, they will not have an abandoned state. They'll just have high power and low power. Is that
according to Hobo leaks, it would seem that those structures are the exception. They will only go to low powered. But that's on Hobo leaks, so that's not a given yet.
Okay, gotcha. So that gives a little bit of value to those Fortizars. So if you want to speculate on the market, might as well go buy one of those. Don't blame me if it's wrong, though.
There's a lot in value.
Nothing's real.
There's a lot of
actually live. Yeah.
There's a lot of value in them regardless, because they're a one-off. If they're destroyed, they're gone. There's no way to build them again.
They're awfully shiny.
So would I be right in thinking that CCP's potentially enacting this change because of what happened on the test server?
Maybe. There was let's tell the listeners what happened on the test server. I think they blew up NOL-TAC in Delve on the test server as an experiment, and it crashed. I'm told it crashed Singularity when the cans all spawned because it was just so much. And I'd also want to mention that this week the Imperium blew up a Fortizar in lowsec and went to try to loot the pieces of it in a Rorqual. It was not a fun experience. The looting experience needs to be tested and maybe tweaked a little bit as you go. The inability to use capital tractor beams on a Rorqual in lowsec really slows down your ability to collect anything anyway. But apparently, there might be a lot of stuff in some of these old structures.
Yeah, Null is one of the most storied stations in all of EVE Online through like the history of all the Great Wars. A lot of the attackers and defenders have been through that system, so I can imagine there's a few 100,000 Capsuleers with at least something in there.
And if you know anything about the old campaigns and stuff of EVE Online, that shown on the actual on the stream at the moment is the can sphere of Null Station dying, and somewhere in there is Mr. V's crew.
Yeah, somewhere there. He left it there.
Most famous crewer in the universe. Yeah. 18,000 cans. That's mind-blowing and also hard on your graphics.
Oof, yeah, that many objects on one grid. That sounds like pain.
I'm pretty sure that even the high-end computers are going to be running potato mode to have any bit of frame rate.
So one piece of advice for how to get ready is take a look at all your structures and make sure they're all fueled. With at least, a month or two of fuel in them. Hello? Yeah, all of them. If you don't want to fuel it, take it down.
One fun thing that's always been sort of more of a nuisance. So at least to this point, my understanding is that CCP's AI doesn't necessarily know how to do follow-on bashes on structures, but with abandoned structures, they don't need to follow on. So you can easily have essentially like an automated cleanup crew of drifters or Triglavians, just sort of popping abandoned structures wherever they happen to be active, provided that they, hit, the regeneration, the damage cap.
Those dumb aliens stole my ships.
It's just like, okay, follow the Triglavians and just loot when they leave the field. Yes.
Perfect.
Then again, for those who are currently on a break or they're forced to be on a break on EVE, double check your assets. If you see it's anywhere in a structure, a citadel, mining complex, engineering complex, refinery, think carefully. And currently, you're still able just to move it into asset safety manually. So if you're not sure how long you'll be on a break, but you do have things that you really want to keep, move them in asset safety, so they're going to an NPC station, because that way you know that, sure, you have to pay the fee, but when you come back, you'll be sure that that stuff is going to still be there, instead of somebody else looted it, or it got blown up, nobody looted it, and it just despawned and it's gone.
Oof,
Earlier this week, CCP hosted a stream. And Makoto, you were on the stream and talking a little bit about Invasion Phase 3. Were there any aspects from that show that you might want to mention again for our listeners who maybe were half paying attention or didn't catch the stream, to catch us up to that point before we go further?
So I'll do a little bit of basic okay, let's assume you've seen nothing at all, and then some of the key components of that stream. So in the first place, the thing that you probably know, but I'm just saying it for the sake of things, the Triglavians have been invading in some capacity for about a year now. and they've been fighting the empires and Concord, and have shown a considerable interest in our stars. And that has been increasingly creepy, and there have been hints that something terrible this way comes, but what exactly that would be hadn't really been shown. At which point, then, we started to get more hints of it with that stream, with the scope episode that shows strange Triglavian constructions. And now we get to this point where, all right, the fight is on. The Triglavians are evidently enacting their master plan, and Concord and the Empires are preparing for a full and proper defense. So essentially, we've gone from like, okay, we're fighting, to, all right, this is actively war.
And that's where you get EdenCon from. That's the... What's that a shorthand version of?
I think it's New Eden Common Defense Initiative.
Nice.
That's what it is too.
Yeah, so essentially the four empires and Concord in a proper joint military command, which in theory hasn't happened in the game world since like YC 3.7, which is like, you know, ages
the
ago.
last time, if you're really talking about the history, that's only when they actually moved in on Sancha's nation. As far as I know, that's the last time in recorded history known to us that the nations and Concords joined arms and took an approach, like took up weapons collectively against a single entity.
And there is some like some, you know, intermixing between the Triglavians, not intermixing, but the storylines do kind of cross a little bit between the Triglavians and the Sancha, right? Like the Triglavians hate the Sancha. Is that fair to say? Or they view them as some sort of weird enemy?
Yeah, so a lot of the Triglavian data streams, they talk about, I think it's like corruption of hive linking or something like that. And they consider the Sancha to be Pushlust, which is essentially to be profane, that they must be extirpated, which is to say they must be wiped out. And near as we can tell, the dominant theory is that it's because the Sancha are essentially Borg-like, and that they take over people and link them into a hive where they have no self-will, and it's a completely involuntary process. And it seems like the Triglavians, while they also have like a lot of funky infomorphy, mind-to-mind link stuff, are really big on people having a say in what's going on and being able to consent or dissent or vote yes or no, and to like engage in a process. So like specifically like a moral imperative to be able to consent.
Neat.
Yeah.
Okay, so the invasions are going to start this week, aren't they? Are they going to start on the 26th in 2 days? Are we going to see Triglavians take systems?
We don't know. We don't know. All we know is that it starts with the 26th, but how it's going to start, how things are going to be introduced is an unknown. There is a possibility, but this is, once again, it's not fact. This is just looking at the past and making a prediction. It could very well be that once we have Tuesday, they're going to make some changes and all the outstanding invasions are switched to a very specific state. Like when they introduced the observatory flashpoints, all the invasions at the same time were set in what we call the third stage, the observatory flashpoints or observatories active, and they stayed there for 1 or 2 days, just to give everybody the opportunity to get into it straight away instead of having to wait and see before they could experience what it's all about. So they could do something similar, but it's all speculation at this point.
If we're in a system that the Triglavians choose as a beachhead entrance, are we still going to be able to undock and dock? Will we be able to use station services?
So this gets to stuff that we see on Singularity via hobo leaks and data mining, and there are a lot of very suggestive strings. And this gets into, again, the question of like what mechanics are going to be active straight away and what's going to be going on and so forth. There are various things that apparently can happen with a system under a third phase invasion. And again, as said, we don't know what's going to be active and what's not. In the first place, there are strings that suggest that you won't be able to get missions in those systems because it's currently under attack. There are strings that suggest at some point, under some conditions, the security status of a system under invasion will drop, possibly becoming low sec, maybe even null sec. We don't know. And there are also strings that deal with some of the implications of that security status drop. For instance, warning you if you try to jump into the system and it's under invasion, the security is lower than normal. Or also, if there's a war HQ in the system and it's gone low sec, it invalidates the war. So there are a lot of things that imply that the security status drop is going to be a thing that happens, but whether that's automatic when the invasion starts or whether players siding with the Triglavians bring that about by various actions, we do not yet know.
So one of the coolest implications for this, and I'm like very not into the like I'm not nearly as deep into the lore aspect of this as you guys are. So correct me if I'm wrong, or where I'm wrong. The Triglavians have shown an interest in blue suns, or blue stars, and one of the systems that has a small blue star is Niarja, which is a 0.5 system that connects. It's a highway that connects the Amar trade hub and the Jita trade hub. So this would potentially be one of the systems that the Triglavians are interested in. And we could theoretically see Niarja go from a 0.5 to a 0.4, which would essentially cut off all trade between Amar and Jita.
And who knows if that security status drop would be temporary or if it's permanent, and this is where we start getting to like, okay, we've seen even stranger stuff in there. For instance, like the initial quadrant trailer showed a gate going offline. So it's like, is there a later stage of invasion once the Triglavians have won where they just like completely cut access to the system? Like, does the system effectively drop off the map? We don't know yet.
Oh, that would be so cool. Imagine just Amar just does not get to talk to Jita anymore. Like, that's completely wild.
Yeah, but here's... Dutch, go for it.
It's the part where there are still other routes to get to Jita. That's just the quickest one if you're going through HiSec. If you look at the autopilot system, you can always say avoid that system. So there are other alternatives. It's just the highway.
Yeah, and so that's totally going to be one of those things where, like, okay, let's say trade routes are cut. In the short term, obviously, it's disruptive to industry, and who knows, like, what happens? Like, oh, hey, does the South just start preferentially using Amar? Does Amar become a more important trade hub? Does Jita fade away because, like, oh, hey, it has access to a smaller area? Or does Jita keep carrying on as a central trade hub just because of the amount of industry and pilots that are north of the Niarja choke point? I mean, we just don't know.
I will say one thing real quick, that if this, like, obviously this is all tinfoil from my end, but if you do make it so you avoid Niarja, the trip from Jita to Amar goes from 9 jumps, which it is currently, to 45 jumps to avoid Niarja.
It's
insane.
a reshape of the map, absolutely. However, what we can expect is that there's just like there are different. Let's just call it a neutral state. And based on player actions, it's going to shift one way or the other. Either it's going to shift towards the Triglavians in 2 phases. Like there is, there's the neutral state, stellar reconnaissance. And then if it starts shifting towards the Triglavian, you first get escalating luminality. And then when it's really fully linked up, fully flipped towards the Triglavian, it's going to be final luminality. At the same time, if you start working in support of Edencom, then from the neutral state, it goes to redoubts and bulwarks until it's finally an Edencom fortress. So that's the part where there's certainly going to be, or at least it looks like there's going to be factional warfare influences where, based on player actions, it's going to flip one way or the other, and it's not a one-way trip. Like if it's going to push towards the Triglavian first, it can still be pushed back to Edencom up until it's in that final stage where it's either an Edencom fortress or it hit final luminality.
So basically, things are about to get nutty.
Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly show that like route change on thing, but carry.
The question then, instead of choosing one side or the other, is there also an option of trying to maintain some kind of aloof neutrality? Just to avoid the area?
That's a really gray area based on general polarity. Like there is a bit of polarization in what I'm going to say next, but you got people who support the Triglavians because they like what the Triglavians represent. At the same time, there's people who want to support the Triglavian because they don't like the Empire. So it's like whatever we can do to mess up Empire space because we want to give them the Empires the finger, let's go with that. At the same time, there's people with ARC who's like, no, let's think about the people living within the empires or just in support of the empires who want to see the invasions fail with the systems falling to Triglavians. What we can see is that neutrality basically comes down to stepping back. If you're going to get in there, there's been standings has been implemented. So if you kill Triglavians, you're going to lose standings with the Triglavians. If you start to fight for the Triglavians, you'll take standing hits probably with Edencom, but depending on which part of Empire space you're in, you'll also be killing Navy Empire faction ships, so you'll start losing standings with that Empire faction. We don't know how possibly interlinked standings work. For example, if currently if you support Amar, your Amar standing goes up, but your Minmatar standing goes down. So at the same time, there isn't really any indication yet if it's just a standing loss with the Empire faction and Edencom, or if it's also going to affect your security standing with Concord.
So the Triglavian invasions have been active already on Tranquility, right? So there are areas in HiSec where you can work with the Triglavians or push against them. If like a player like me who hasn't really done too much of that, can we still get involved in Chapter 3, or is this something that we had to be involved with in Chapter 1 and 2?
No, absolutely. You can still get involved no matter what stage it's in. Just looking at HoboLeak's file, it looks like there's different kinds of difficulty ratings. So just like with Abyssal, you got Tier 1 up to Tier 5. Currently, you got emerging conduits, which you see outside of invasions. You've got the minor conduits, which basically is the entry level if you're trying to run conduits in invaded space. Then you got the major conduits, and then you got the next tier, the end dungeon. It was currently it's the observatory flashpoints. In Chapter 1, it was the World Arc Proving Grounds. What it's going to be in Chapter 3, we don't know. But it's probably going to be a part where, depending on how things are going to flip, you either have a final fight to push the Triglavians out, or you can have a final fight to push the Empires out. So even if you're just trying to get started, it looks like there's going to be a bit of at least it seems likely that the resource war sites could be implemented in one way or the other. That is speculation. That's, like I said, that's not a given. So no matter really what your background is, whether it's industry or if you're trying to get in there with the combat sites, it seems like there is something to do for everybody, even if you're just getting started.
And we're also likely to see some new effects, and how exactly it plays into the timeline of these invasions is very much a question. There are, for instance, strings and objects on Singularity that imply that you might be able to, for instance, attack Edencom Sinojammers. So whether that's a situation where security status drops, but there's still Sinojammers until Triglavian supported forces bring them down, or you bring down the Sinojammers and it drops the security level, we don't know. But there are definitely going to be some funky new mechanics in at some level or sometime in this.
And I understand there are also some new structures coming into the game. Do we know anything, and that they're going to be on both sides of the conflict? Do we know anything about these new structures or what any of them do, any of their purposes?
So the one that most likely ties into the essentially Resource Wars 2.0 theory is, for instance, the Edencom Thankyou, which appears to be a receiving structure for resources and like a central warehouse or cache for minerals and that type of thing, theoretically. But the thing that was featured in the scope video, the funky triangular construction that was very large, you can evidently in that scope video see a Leshak in front of it, and the Leshak looks tiny compared to the structure.
Tiny, yeah.
Yeah, so that ties into what the Triglavians are doing, which by all appearances is they are here for our stars, and their objective in any given system is essentially to build a Dyson swarm around each star and harvest energy, which brings us to like just the name of the quadrant, which is Eclipse, and also some strings that suggest that over the course of multiple phases, the stars and systems that the Triglavians are in the process of claiming or do claim, that they will be eclipsed by essentially megastructure construction.
Makes perfect sense. It doesn't sound fun. We need those stars.
Yeah, apparently we do. Also, one other thing, so we're talking about new structures, but CCP has also been hinting at maybe new ships, right? I remember there was a scope video in the beginning of April where we saw a ship with upwell structure type coloring with this weird little blue lightning coming out of it. Do we think that we're going to be able to get our hands on those? Are they going to be like player ships that the Edencom will reward us with if we fight against the Triglavians, or just
yeah. I mean, we are still at this point just guessing, but I doubt CCP would be making that much of a big deal about a ship if they didn't intend to provide us access to it. So, I mean, we also see like Triglavian industrials, which are like, okay, industrials, that's cool. But certainly the Edencom ship, it's been featured in a couple of, in like the trailer and in the new scope. And for that matter, we got funky things that looked like building materials in the recent event. So in all likelihood, just so that players that are supporting Edencom have something funky and fun to play with, it's not just like, okay, Edencom, you get the same sort of incursion loot you normally do. Oh, but if you fight for the Triglavians, you can get, like Dreadnought BPCs. Yeah, I think they're trying to incentivize both sides.
That is neat. And from what I hear, like the way the standings appear to work, it's very much one or the other. Like you can't just play both sides, right?
Not on the same character.
And the ship that we were talking about, I nicknamed Zappy. Well, I didn't. Everyone seemed to like collectively call it Zappy Boy. I really hope.
Yeah. I think it's currently just nicknamed the Zappy Boy. I think it's stuck.
I want to know more about it. I want to know what it does. Right? I want to know everything about it now. I don't want to wait 2 days.
Well, you'll probably have to wait a bit longer. Remember, 2 days is when it's going to start. It's not going to be there all the way. That's not very likely.
And for that matter, we don't see any hint of that on Singularity yet. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in the first place, CCP has put some red herrings in there. In the second place, that there's stuff that they haven't put on Singularity. Like, this is their, like, buzz building dump, where it's like, okay, you can see some of what we're coming, but we've got some secrets in store or some tricks that we're going to play so that, no one, including, like, ridiculous tinfoilers like us, can theorize about.
I do want to give a lot of props to CCP with how they're handling it currently. I mean, in the past, they put a lot of data up front. It was min-max before it hit. And currently, there's just this big sense of anticipation where everybody is just really excited for what is going to happen. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know, but we want to try it. And at the same time, and this is something that just reaches back a bit about playing both sides, it makes perfect sense if you take a step back and you don't just look at lore or gaming mechanics, because currently the only way to get your hands on the Dreadnought, the Zenitra, is to both run the Triglavian side to get the BPCs, but each time you run it, you're not guaranteed to actually get a BPC. And if you get a BPC, it could also be for a component or just the Dreadnought, and you need several to do it. So if you're trying to run that and you would take standing hits with the Empires without the guarantee that you get the blueprints that you need, and you need several before you can even start, it makes no sense to implement standing hits, because then it's like, well, you want to run this content, but you can only do it a couple of times, and then you need a lot more time to work your standings back up before you can even attempt it. And at the same time, if you run it for the Empire side, that's where you can get the materials. So not implementing standing hits, because you need both sides for that specific type of reward for the Dreadnought, it makes perfect sense if you just take a little bit of a step back and not just look at it as a player or from a lore point of view. This is more about taking a step back and look at it as the person who is providing the game that other people can play. Because it's not like I want to play it, but I only got 2 shots and then I'm out of luck.
Yeah, I do wonder whether they're going to institute Triglavian LP loyalty points in some way. I don't know if we've seen any strings that suggest that one way or another.
Then again, I mean, this is what we know now. I mean, we've seen it so far. It's been divided up in 3 chapters, and even during chapters, new things were introduced. So we might not have it now, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and what's interesting is also that in the first place, CCP has an entire quadrant to fill with this content. So it's, they're going to be introducing more stuff, and also. As was talked about in the CCP stream, they mentioned that in the first place, this is sort of the culmination of the invasion story. It's not the culmination and conclusion of the Triglavian story. So how exactly the Triglavians will remain a part of New Eden and what exactly players can do with that, we can just throw darts at a board, but they're going to be around one way or another.
So what do we know too much? I kind of want to take it back just a few steps. For the Triglavians, what do we really know about them? As a player, I fly the Kikimora, I fly the Leshek, and I kind of try and follow along with what the Triglavians do. But what are they? How do they interact with the universe that we know? And where did they come from? And what do they want?
I can give you the big picture. I can't get it into the tinier details or the more specific things.
Yeah,
but what we know from what we know so far is that the Triglavians, at one point in history, they lived within known space. Something happened that pushed them out. They ended up in abyssal space, and their entire society structured themselves within 3 main clans. And within those 3 main clans, there's an unknown number of subclades. The clans they call clades, and they're subclades, and they're all about, they seem to be about, as long as we push each other to the limits, we're going to just keep challenging each other, we will come forth with advancements. But we're not just going to sit here and do nothing. We need to challenge each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a survival of the fittest constant challenge component. And what's interesting, with regard to they retreated into the abyss to run from something, there are implications that they existed at the same time as the Second Empire Jove. So the Jove, as we know them, our Directorate Jove, are sort of like the pale shadow of the Jove, and they're the third Jovian Empire. The Triglavians coexisted in whatever capacity they were with or as part of the Second Empire Jove, even to the point of being involved in like polities or like in states with them. There are implications that when they fled to the Abyss, it was to escape persecution, disease, being hunted. Disease isn't necessarily something that you get directly from Triglavian lore, though it is a theme in certain other evacuations that look like they date from about the same era. The important thing is that they are, without a doubt, enemies of the Drifters, and that because of their survival of the fittest mindset, they think that the imperative insofar as New Eden is concerned is to test our worthiness. And if we are not worthy, then clearly we're not worth being allowed to consume resources that the Triglavians want.
And that makes a lot of sense because they do have this like theme of like proving grounds and proving, like just proving oneself. If you go into the Abyss, there's like a proving grounds, and part of the invasion, like the end thing, was like a proving thing, right?
Yeah,
Yep, it's a recurring theme. The word proving comes back a lot, even in the internal communications that you can get glimpses of with the and now let me double check that I get it right, the data streams, like the Triglavian trinary data streams. You got different categories, and you got numbered 1 to 6. And that's where you can see proving just keeps coming back, even towards their communication with the empires. And it's like a way of forcing a stalemate. Like, okay, this is something we need to decide on it. And if you look at the structure of having 3 clades, that means you'll never end up in deadlock. There's always going to be a majority if all 3 vote.
That makes sense. And also, one other thing I wanted to get your insight on. I was watching this stream, I believe it was on Tuesday or Wednesday, with CCP Delegate Zero, some of you guys, and CCP Burger. CCP Delegate Zero kept mentioning something that I was confused about. It was Isogen 5. And the Triglavians are searching for Isogen 5. What is that? Why do they want it?
So Isogen 5... So Blue Stars and Eve have sort of a long history. Like the first real hint that there's something funky going on there is actually with the return of Jamil Sarum and like a Terran superweapon and blah, 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 blah. And it's like powered by Isogen 5. And Isogen 5 is basically like it's a funky, unstable isotope of the isogen that we know and love from mining that has like funky space magic effects. So it's unobtainium, basically. It's the magical thing that powers stuff. But what happens is later on then, like Isogen 5 detonations around various stars is what causes the Salient instant and gives us wormhole space. And then there are, hints that like funky, possibly like ISO 5 related things may have also been involved in why W477 TAC P or Carolyn Star happened. That could just also have been that it was just like this Dyson swarm with wormhole mechanics that exploded and did that. Either way, the relevant thing is that the Triglavians have, from even before the invasions, demonstrated an interest in blue stars. And because blue stars are associated with Isogen 5 and magic space-timey weirdness involving like wormhole formation and spatial deformation and that type of thing, there's an implication that they're, with their focus on blue stars at this point with invasions, that they are looking to do more very strange things to the space-time continuum.
Okay, so this is like a common thing, or not a common theme, but like a thread that's been kind of placed even 5-6 years ago in Eve's history. So it's neat to see that they're being kind of consistent with these types of things.
Yeah. And honestly, actually, like IceGen 5, it's not even just like 5 years ago. It's not even 10 years ago. Like Apocrypha was what, like 2007?
Oh, that's true, because that's what caused the wormholes you mentioned. All right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's always been there in the background. It's just sort of been one of those things that, like, you know, players have never really directly tangled with it because it's sort of like, it's sort of outside of, I guess, our technological level, effectively. Like, it's crazy precursor stuff. It's not for like normal humans like you and me. But the Triglavians have a lot of technology that's crazily more advanced than the empires in certain ways, like space-time manipulation. So, you know, when you get them, for instance, like, oh, hey, shattered wormholes became a thing because of like Carolyn's star in this Dyson swarm exploding, and now, oh, hey, the Triglavians are here and they are potentially building Dyson swarms around blue stars. It's like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, what are they doing? Like, CCP's like basically said that they intend to change the geography of Eve in some major ways. And it's not just going to be like security status changes. So it's like, what else is going to happen? Are we going to get like strange new patterns of wormhole formation? Are the Triglavians going to like link together the systems that they successfully invade and conquer? Or, I mean, we have no idea. This is like deep tinfoil. You know, we might not even see a hint of how this is going to unfold in the next few months. It might be, you know, a year. Who knows?
One thing that I'd like to chime in on is, and this is something that's really hard to do right, but CCP is putting breadcrumbs out there. And to find them and to piece them together, I'm just going to call there's different difficulty levels. But if you go out there, if you look for it, it's out there. So I've heard people say, but nothing is happening in Eve. But then when you look at other things, like see what's happening with the introduction of the Sancha incursions, there was a story arc with hints that included completely different things. And it's not just looking at what's happening now, it's worthwhile to look back at what happened in the past. So when I was listening to the stream with CCP, and they started with Caroline's star, the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, right, that makes sense. Why didn't I think about that before?
And then, of course, you start getting funkiness where it's like, oh, hey, like the Nexus, that strange vortex in Drifter Hives, like they brought that back in too. And does it mean that they're going to like draw in all of the components of the Drifter storyline? No, but maybe this is another data point, or it's another thing that will allow them to do, well, who knows what.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It has to do with how much do I have to pay attention to this? So here's my question.
So
if you're fighting the pirate factions, you need to know separately Serpentis from Blood Raiders, from Sancha's Nation. You need to know all that stuff separately. If you're fighting the Triglavians, do you need to pay attention to who's the Velas, the Perrin, the Svarog, the various clays? Do I have to pay attention to that? Are there going to be like 5 different invasions coming on Tuesday, and one will be themed for each one, and I'll have to like how much do I have to know?
Well, so about that, so first things first, I think basically so long as you know how to fight Triglavians, or are willing to like fit a doctrine ship once doctrines start getting ironed out, you can participate in the fighting. That should be pretty straightforward. And insofar as figuring out the storyline goes, like, honestly, that's part of the reason why ARC exists in the structure that it does, is so that we can like figure this out and try to like get it out there so that people who are interested but don't want to like spend 5 years reading all of the backstory can like get it in a more digested and digestible form. But it also does look like CCP might have effectively multiple types of invasions going on, at least because you're going to be fighting, if you're on the side of the Triglavians, local forces for the empires. And also, it might be that we're going to start getting like messages from the different clades with Semiosis consoles. So at least for like people who are like in the deep end of the pool, like we are, having a little bit of that knowledge can be very helpful.
You mentioned the semiosis consoles. When I was running the Edencom sites, which were super fun, it was part of the an EVE event. It was like a battle cruiser only, like I don't want to say dungeon, but it was like a PvE event with only battle cruisers go in. Some of the loot that dropped were semiosis consoles, encrypted, unencrypted, and they were for the different clades. What do those do? Or do we know what they are for? Or is it just like, are these the breadcrumbs?
So
Dutch, go for it.
it's this is like, so far we know about one way they work, and that's if you have one of those in your inventory. It doesn't have to be in the station you're in, it doesn't have to be in the ship you're in, but if you have one of those items, it is possible that you could get an Eve mail with a message. It could be a link to a YouTube video or a different video where you get bits and pieces of information. So that's what they've done in the past with the ones that weren't encrypted, because if you had those, and depending if you had one or if you had all three, different things could get different parts of a message, and that was a bit of binding it together. There was Triglavian symbols were there with a message, so that's another part with, okay, try to figure out what's their alphabet, what are these messages saying. So it's one of those things that in order to enjoy the content, you don't have to know about it. If you want to get more into it, there's different levels, different kind of challenges to enjoy and try to piece things together that might help you understand a bit more about either what the Triglavians are, how they operate, or possibly what could be coming in the near future.
So this leads me to my next question. Let's say I am just kind of an uninitiated capsuleer who just wants to kind of dip my toes in to this whole invasion mess. Are there institutions in place where I can go fight the Triglavians or fight Edencom without having to like uproot my entire Eve like social structure? Like, I don't want to have to leave my corp to do this or leave my alliance to do this. Are there places I can go that they'll take me? I don't want to say take me for a ride, but like allow me to participate at my leisure.
Oh, absolutely. ARC is one of those. We say, like, you don't have to be part of ARC, the Alliance, to join us in our fleets. We run public fleets in support of the empires. I know other groups that are starting to have public fleets. I know Asterothi is one of them. Where they say, look, all you have to do is show up. ARC has the part where they say, okay, we've got some ships available that we know, like if you get started, doctrine ships can be expensive. So we offer the service of showing up. If we have them available, here's a fleet ship. When the fleet is over or when you're done, just give it back so others can enjoy the same service. And we do encourage people to at one point say, like, get your own ship. Makes it a lot more easier. There are people who are getting started. I know I don't have the name, but there's a player in the Starter Corporation from Caldari that is running fleets with we call it kitchen sink. Basically, just show up with whatever ship you have. And there are people who just say, look, if you want to be in it, you have to be with us. But it's just try to put a bit of a feeder out. If you're unsure, I know Asterothi could make recommendations, like maybe you want to try there, maybe you want to try there. If you join the ARC public channel that's in-game called Consortium Operations, that's where you'll find info on the Discord where we send out pings like where are we going to be active as ARC, when do we plan to run a fleet, and if you just want to get in, if you got questions like, hey, I want to support the Triglavians, who do I need to get in touch with? Like, those are the good places to start without having to drop whatever corporation or alliance you're in.
Oh, that's awesome. That's super good to know, because like I want to do more. Like there's like a limit to what you can do as a solo pilot, right? So I can run the Edencom sites and get these like data streams, and I can run Abyss sites. But after that, I can't do too much by myself. So that's cool to know that I can just take a break from whatever I'm doing elsewhere in the universe and come and I can fly with you guys or fly with groups like Ashtarathi's group.
It is fantastic. I mean, if I'm looking at people showing up in the fleets that I and others from ARC run, we've got people from Wormhole Space, we got people from Nullsec, we got HiSec, Empire, Faction Warfare. We even have people that say, if we meet anywhere else, we'll start shooting. But you know what? We like this change of pace. We like to enjoy this content. So while we're in here, let's just coexist for the time being.
And of course, if you're hanging out with us and strange things are happening, you'll see the tinfoil hats come out, and you get to see us like argue with each other at great length about what individual lines mean or how much we should read into like this element of Slavic religion that's being referenced, and so on and so forth. So even if you don't necessarily want to do the deep dives yourself onto like the lore and what all it means, you'll at least be able to see the sausages being made, as it were.
And you guys do stuff in US time zone, EU time zone, all time zones?
Currently, we have a really solid in EU and early US. We would have been active more solidly in the US time zone as well, but yeah, pandemic happened, so a lot of things just forced people to make different choices. But we are definitely working on getting US time zone coverage as well. We definitely have a US time zone FC ready to start as soon as all things allow it.
Do we know when do the Convocation of Empyreans do their fleets too? That's EU and US time zone also probably?
I think it's late EU and definitely a solid US with Ashtarothi, with the Convocation of Empyreans.
Ashtarothi is West Coast US. So I think during lockdown, he has a fair bit of access during EU time zone, but he's primarily a US time zone player.
All right, so
what next?
So we all have to think about picking a side here coming up soon. Unless you're right, there's no penalty on standings with the other side. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like at present, there are some implications that this might operate as sort of like essentially a new sort of like almost faction warfare system where you're able to like. There's been some comment on like actually like joining Edencom. I'm not sure if that's necessarily like a faction warfare, like, oh, hey, you can join a corporation thing. But certainly there are standings for both sides, and you're at least going to have negative or positive standings, respectively, with Triglavians and Edencom. So how exactly that's going to play out with regard to like people possibly getting like positive standings with, for instance, the Triglavians and not being shot by them, I'm not exactly sure how that is going to work, or if that is in fact even what CCP has planned. But yeah, there are definitely going to be repercussions one way or another for the side you choose. I
gotta say, if Edencom wants more followers, they better have some really good outfits, right? Because the Triglavian outfits are super dope. There are so many like player groups out there who aren't necessarily into roleplay, but when the Triglavians kind of reared their head, it kind of got into it. They fly Triglavian ships. They have the Triglavian cosmetics, and they like tentatively support the Triglavians as well. So Edencom has to step up their game.
Seriously on that. I think one thing that people like, is sort of get into this habit of is thinking of role playing as like, oh, hey, I put on my robe and wizard hat and that type of thing. And it's like all like slash emote and, toward dramatic interpersonal storylines. And that's absolutely for some people an element of role play. But Eve, it's also like, honestly, like you are flying a spaceship and you're organizing corporations and coalitions, and like just taking a position in the game world and sort of like, oh, I'm supporting this faction or that faction, like that is also an element of role playing. Honestly, like that can be pretty fun to just have like that sense of context for what you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, role playing is definitely not like a dirty word in EVE Online. So much of it has really been kind of revamped, I guess, or looked at again in the last 2 years or so. I know CCP Delegate Zero, and presumably his team, but I think it's just him, if I were to guess, has been doing a lot of work on all of the weird storylines of EVE Online that have kind of been uh, forgotten about or dropped. I know there's stuff with the Amar, there's stuff with the Minotaur, there's like conflict going on between the empires right now. There's like some sort of crazy murder thing going on in Floswin, which is outside of my depth. But it's not just Triglavian stuff. It's all of these threads are kind of being pulled together.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot more content boiling around at the margins, and stuff that you can like engage with or not engage with, and it's fun to experience the world in a different way, in regard to that content. So yeah, definitely, like if you pay attention to like world news articles and that type of thing, like there's more going on than you might think if you just focus on like the development mediated stuff.
It's definitely the part where it's no longer that CCP delivers the story that is happening. They're also starting to look at things like, hey, what are major things done by the players that might be newsworthy? And then or what are things that could be used to start a story? For example, the entire situation with faction warfare and the system of Flossiswin.
Yeah.
In recent years and in recent months, CCP has sometimes been doing things with a purpose behind them, such as the blackout or such as the current mineral scarcity. And is this invasion a case of something where CCP has some kind of objective, or is this just developing the storyline of New Eden and adding richness and depth to the game?
So there are a few angles to this that can be pulled in, that it can be looked at it from. The obvious first and initial take is that CCP has been wanting to change the geography of EVE and to have like a world-altering event for a while. And in a fairly major way, like the story arc that started with like the drifters and shattered wormholes and all of that weirdness like 5-6 years ago, even from that point, it was clear that they were wanting to do something pretty big in terms of geography. And I think in a very real way, this is a major component of that. The question, of course, what ends up being the objective, like the end state for that geographic change. And so, like, for instance, you see references about like, okay, like changing security levels, or, oh, hey, videos showing gates going down, or, stuff that like shows like wormholes looking a little bit more like abyssal traces, which is weird, which we don't know where that goes. But I mean, like they've been doing a lot of work, for instance, building up a lot of new dynamic systems. Like this starts resembling almost like faction warfare. So it's like, what if this is maybe like a trial run for a system that they could then pour over to like a revamp of faction warfare? Or what if they're building out a complete line of Triglavian ships, including industrials now, because, oh, hey, maybe like in a year or 2 years, the Triglavians are going to end up being essentially a fifth playable race. It's like, are the Triglavians just going to take like a few random systems in HiSec, or is it all going to like connect to like a central set of systems somewhere? Like, oh, hey, are the Triglavians suddenly going to like show up with like NPC sovereignty in the drone lands, or like could it even like be Jovian space? I mean, that's totally out there. And like the stuff that we saw from like CCP marketing with like a Jovian station in this abyssal landscape, like that's CCP marketing. And I think we all know that they just do whatever looks pretty. But the flip side is like, you look at that and it's like, okay, but what is their plan? Like, is this, like, what sort of timeline are we looking at? And like, where do they want to take it? Because they're clearly like, they're iterating on this and they're building on this.
I could see Carnera shaking his head with the whole.
That would be a no. CCP marketing does not do whatever looks pretty. I'm going to disagree on that one. At least they did when I was there, and I don't.
They do produce pretty things, like.
The videos are beautiful, and that comes through the marketing group unless they've moved them. But
so I guess then
they have a reason. They have some reason.
Carneros, then the question I have for you is like, okay, so we saw this shot that showed a Jovian station like at angle, like presumably like derelict and abandoned, with like an abyssal landscape in front of it and like a star behind it. And it looked like it's like, oh, hey, this is abyssal strangeness, possibly in Jove space. Like, is this saying that like maybe the end state in 6 months is that, oh, hey, Jove space now is the Triglavian homeland and these systems they take are going to connect to it?
Maybe Jove made incursions, I hate to say that word, into abyssal space or just some of these places. Maybe there have been Jove and Triglavian contact in some of these other pocket dimensions, and that's leftover contact from the past, now long since derelict. We've come across a lot of derelict signs of second Jove the sleeper sites and wormholes. I mean, this stuff, it could be a flashback to a past event and not a future state prediction.
I will say there's a really interesting sci-fi series that Hilmar actually mentioned in our interview with him earlier this year or late last year. I don't remember what it is. It's called The Three Body Problem. It's a series of 3 novels written by a Chinese sci-fi author, translated to English, so you don't have to do any crazy translation. It is super interesting. And there are like a lot of similarities between a lot of early similarities between the Triglavians and the big bad guys in this thing. So if you guys are looking for a sci-fi novel to read and you want to also know more about what might happen, you should definitely check it out. The first novel is called The Three Body Problem. I don't remember if the series has a name beyond that, but
I believe it's called The Remembrance of Earth. It's called Remembrance of Earth's Past. I don't know.
Wow, that sounds about right. But the bad guys in there are called the Trisolarians, and they do some pretty gnarly stuff, and it doesn't necessarily end well for us. So maybe check it out. See what you can do to stop humanity from dying out.
I mean, and even with this, like, okay, what happens if like the Triglavians take a system and they build like, a Dyson swarm and like basically eclipse a sun? It's like, yeah, and what happens to like inhabited planets in that system when the sun is like essentially like only a quarter of its light is getting past Triglavian structures or something? That's going to be a cold time.
It's going to be really cold. I mean, I was in Iceland during the solar eclipse. I can tell you from personal experience, getting less sunlight is a massive drop in temperature. You will notice.
In that 15 minutes.
Those books are intriguing. I haven't gotten around to them yet. Give us an X in Twitch chat if you miss Eve novels, though. I wish I had an Eve novel.
I miss Eve novels for sure.
Chronicles, even. It's been a couple of years since we've had our last.
I will say one thing with regard to Eve novels. Obviously, this isn't quite fiction; it's history. But Andy Groen put out an update earlier this week about how Empires of Eve Volume 2 is going. The pandemic kind of threw a wrench in the cog of getting his books published, like getting the physical hard copies of the books. But he does have a few that he's gone through and made a few changes for, and I think he's in the process of getting the finalized order of all the books. So that is coming. If you aren't aware of it, it's essentially just a history book on what the players have done in the nullsec area of EVE Online, and the great stories there. Empires of EVE Volume 1 is really, really cool. I have it on my coffee table, and even normal people find it interesting to read through. It's a pretty good way to get other people involved in EVE Online without shoving like the game down their face. So I really like Empires of EVE Volume 1. Empires of EVE Volume 2 is coming out as well. Again, not fiction, like geez, I'm blanking on all of the Tony Gonzalez books.
Templar 1,
Yeah.
Age, and then there are various like novellas, like I think Theodicy, and there's one that he had written actually possibly before he was actually a CCP employee. He may have been an ISD at the time. It's ancient history now. I've forgotten a lot of it, unfortunately. But one thing that I noticed, there's been a track of this for the past while. CCP has hired another narrative designer. And I think that was maybe 6 months ago, maybe more like 9 months ago. And so they now have both Delegate Zero and the new CCPer, whose call sign and name I don't know. So it implies that, their production is probably going to tick up, and hopefully they can distribute that heavy load a little bit more.
And I will say CCP Delegate Zero, it's probably not a name that you are super familiar with because he doesn't do game design. At least I don't think he does game design. But he's been with CCP as long as I can remember. When I was on CSM 6, he was still there writing all of the stories there. He did the Empress Channel whole arc as well. So he kind of has an encyclopedic knowledge of what is going on or what has gone on in EVE Online. So it's not like you're going to get some sort of fresh takes and retcons of the EVE lore. It's definitely the guy that started it all is still there.
Yeah, he's definitely been there through quite a lot and had his finger in a lot of pies. If you go back to watch that CCP stream, he's the one with the fairly philosophic voice and the very, let's consider this and perhaps and so on. He hedges even the things that he's making what would seem to be definitive statements. So you definitely have to listen to what he says 2 or 3 times and then understand that he's giving room for himself or other people to write it a little bit differently if that's what would make the story more engaging. It's a fascinating listen.
He knows EVE players very well, so he knows exactly what he can't say and what he can say in order to ruin. Also, a really, really good poster for whenever he does post.
Oh yeah, no, he's incisive and insightful. It's a lot of fun to give him crap, and needless to say, he certainly returns the favor.
Man, he's great.
One thing CCP definitely deserves a lot of credit for is how they keep looking back and trying to give everything a place. Like if they're introducing the drifters, and now with the Triglavians, the Triglavian ships, they keep looking back and try to find things as balanced as possible. Same with lore, same with story. They're not just making things new without looking at, hey, we still need to integrate this with everything that is already in the EVE game, in the EVE universe, and we have to make sure that there is a balance, that everything still has a purpose, and that takes a lot of dedication, and CCP is getting it right. They're not just coming up where you get timely, all sort of duct tape where if you just look at it critically, you go, that doesn't really make much sense. If you start digging into it, everything connects. And that speaks volumes of how much they care and how much they really put their efforts into to make sure that nothing becomes obsolete, everything has a place, and that when they're introducing new elements, the entire meta doesn't fall apart at the edges.
Yeah, this game, it's vast, and keeping the story as cohesive as it is over the course of essentially 20 years of production, it's a bit of a feat. And one thing I will say, considering we're getting toward the end, if I might give a shout out, is that cool?
And then after this, we'll go to our news segment.
Okay. So just wanted to say, of course, for those of you who are curious about the lore, want to understand like exactly where we get to where we are, and why Dutch, myself, Ash, all of the various folks involved in this sort of content, like why we think what we do. In the first place, just come hang out, ask us questions, tinfoil with us. We always love to tinfoil, and we can do it endlessly. And of course, if you're interested in like a more digested view of things, then you can definitely check out the Discourse channel, where the ARC Discourse crew periodically produces in-world news. And of course, if you want to see something positively ridiculous and quite amazing, the 4th issue of the Triglavian primer is the one that sort of like made CCP shake its head in wonderment, and that's the one that discussed Triglavian targeting patterns and their apparent preference for certain classes of blue stars. So definitely reading that, and also looking at the target list. Haria and Ilm produced a list of what they consider to be the most likely systems for the next stage of invasion, and it's quite the read, and it might inform whether, for instance, you might think about relocating your industry from the system you're in to an adjacent one.
What fascinates me most about Eve, right, is so this is very much like a super in-depth type of discourse and just analyzation of things. But if I'm just like an industrialist, I can benefit from what you guys did, because I could like put stuff on the market that like people fighting might need in these areas, and I can make a mint.
Oh, not just that. I mean, if we tried it several times, where people like, look, these conduits, these sites, there's ore in there, and it has content that normally you wouldn't find anywhere in HiSec. So it's worth following us in after we clear the site to go after the ore. So even if you're an industrialist, there is a lot to be gained in invaded space. That just reach out, communicate, and the riches are there for the taking.
I do see Niarja on that list, so fingers crossed.
It is a fantastic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nullsec resident, I get excited when I hear something about ore. I remember ore. Ore was great.
Wow.
The one thing that we didn't discuss was weather effects. If you go into an abyssal site with a filament, you can go into different types of abyssal sites, and you'll see different kinds of weather in the site. I've heard a rumor that weather might actually be coming to our space through somehow from the abyssal sites. I thought that was part of the abyssal site. Do you know anything about this, or is that just a rumor?
It's not a rumor. It's most definitely not a rumor. Based on what is out in Hobo Leaks. So once again, it's Hobo Leaks, so it's not set in stone. It's not sure if it's going to stay this way, but it definitely looks that the same as with currently in foothold systems, if the Stellar Accelerator is up, you get certain bonuses and penalties that are very similar in how the weather effects work if you're in abyssal space. We've seen bits and pieces in Hobo Leaks where they're talking about different effects, such as if it's related to Omar, you'll see effect to energy neutralizing. With Kaldari, it's the range on ECM, amongst other things. So in that way, depending on where you are, there are definitely clear cues that there will be system-wide effects that affect the attributes of your ships, such as remote reps, hit points, and other parts of e-warfare or different types of attacks such as energy neutralizers.
And what's also worth noting about this is that those effects, if I'm not mistaken, also influence the NPCs, right? So for instance, if you're in Caldari space and there's a Caldari observatory up and they're buffing ECM, the Caldari NPCs fighting on behalf of Edencom are also going to get those benefits. So if, for instance, you're running on behalf of the Triglavians, it makes sense to prioritize the destruction of Caldari observatories so that your fleet has an easier time of it.
It's a blanket application, so it doesn't matter if you're a player or a Triglavian NPC or an Empire NPC. Everything in that system will be affected to that. And what is more interesting, and this is a more tinfoilery, it looks like instead of having the foothold system, this could also affect other systems that are being invaded instead of just the foothold, and depending on the other systems, they're just going to be different penalties because of the invasion. It could very well be that the focus isn't just about the foothold system. So I've got my fingers crossed that if people are really focusing on the bigger sites, and you, for example, if it's people trying to support the empires and others like, nope, we don't want to support the empires, we want to support the Triglavians, but we can't beat that fleet composition. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on all these smaller sites in the other systems. And by doing that, they're still able to flip it in support of the Triglavians, even though other groups are focusing on the bigger side. So I've got my fingers crossed that it's something that it's not just one system or one specific site that is going to affect which way the progress bar is going to flip, either for the Triglavians or for the empires. What is known is that at the end, there's going to be a site, and depending on how that fight turns out, it's definitely going to flip over if it reached that point. So it's definitely going to be a very hot spot of a lot of activity. And hopefully not just in the foothold system, also in just all of the systems that are being invaded. But nothing is certain yet. That's just me hoping.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming and joining us. Thank you to the Arataka Research Consortium for all your hard work. Thank you to Ashtarothi for your help from chat and behind the scenes. Thank you all. Let's stop and look at our news of the week for a moment while we still have the group here together. So this week, Northern Coalition DOT deployed some forces to X-Tech 70 MU in Pureblind. One presumes this is in response to the Imperium's Jeff SIG deployment. We don't know the scale of their deployment. It might just be a SIG as well. It might just be a few interested parties. It might be a full-scale deployment. We don't know. But we are seeing snuff box forces bolstered by Pandemic Horde, United Federation of Conifers, Pandemic Legion sometimes. Looking at you, Elise. And getting some help from time to time in their battles against the Imperium SIG forces and the Initiative. And that's great fun. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. We also see that the region of Cache is embroiled in conflict. We've seen the development of a new nickname for Cache, which is Cacheganistan. Cracks me up. Hopefully that's not offensive to anyone. There have been capitals and super capitals in the battles there. There have been rumors that Nulsa Shnaya Sholopin might be getting evicted from Cache. Do you know anything about that, Elise?
I was actually in one of the fights around a Fortizar in IVP a couple days ago, where it actually devolved into a pretty big cap brawl, right? So going after one of the structures there. And I think something like 200 bill was lost. It was more or less even. It was like 49-51 in terms of the sides that came out on top. Legacy had took a slight disadvantage, and then everyone else that was involved took a, we're talking like this minuscule tiny advantage. But yeah, 200 bill was lost there. There was a huge fight in TVN last night as well. So that entire area of the map is getting pretty heated up. North,
TVN's
obviously.
the other side. TVN is
Yeah.
the silent. But during the TVN fight, I heard that Test dropped 2 new Fortizars in cache at the same time during the same, time slice. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Matterall has Villion in the morning shows. I think yesterday or the day before, and he was talking about how Nullsignatic Lupin was basically getting thrown to the curb. So we'll see how that actually plays out. I will say there's a lot going on in EVE Online, all over the place. It's not just the north. It's not just near Cache. It appears to be kind of everywhere.
All right. And then I'm going to give a link to McLeod to drop in chat too.
Oh, of course, dude.
Sorry. There's a thread on Reddit that's just emerging right now about a Vanquisher class Titan that died just before downtime early this morning. Apparently it was just purchased. Apparently it was moving. There's some questions about the purchase itself. I will direct you to Reddit for rumors on this. It's probably not hard information. I will point out that the tank on that Vanquisher, it was fitted in basically the equivalent of a string bikini. Other than the armor rigs, the only other defensive module it had on it was an abyssal damage control. No, guys.
It really looks like a travel fit, and with travel fit, that basically means make sure you can recharge your cap as quick as possible to once the timer for your for your Sino jump, like once your jump timer is over, that you're in a position where you can jump right through again. It's definitely been a while since I've seen a fit like that.
Chain jumps. It doesn't make sense in the days where you can't chain jumps and you have to rest each time. I don't know. I would yell at one of my guys for tanking a ship like that.
Now I'd heard rumors that maybe that it was trying to gank a Rorqual, but to be completely honest, a ship fitted like that is not ganking anything.
It's also a 34-day-old character that lost the Vanquisher.
Yeah, it's very much a travel fit on there, and considering that it died about 5 minutes before downtime, you could tell that's generally a time that a lot of people who want to move very expensive stuff generally tend to, because of the impending downtime at the top of the hour. The idea there is obviously if you do get caught, you can potentially tank till downtime. In order to tank to downtime, you actually need to fit a tank.
If you're traveling just before downtime and you see a Rorqual and you think, oh, I should shoot that is bait. Hello, people, that is bait. As someone who has lost a Titan to shooting a Rorqual, that was bait. I will tell you that is bait. But anyway, hopefully I've learned something from those days. Maybe not.
The Vanquisher also died 4 minutes before downtime. If you want to do this type of thing, make sure not to do it 4 minutes before downtime, but like 20 seconds before downtime. Then you're good to go.
Exactly.
There's definitely a lot of things with regard to that kill mill that could raise flags of suspicion, like, hey, this is a weird anomaly. What is happening here?
The person who sold it, at least on Reddit, claims he's now been banned because I guess some of the money that he got for the Vanquisher might be in question. So it'll be interesting to just follow up on that thread in like a week to see what comes of it.
Yeah, that's not shady at all.
Not your average Vanquisher last mail, guys. Watch this one.
And I wanted to put the thing out there, the speculation out there as to he was trying to gank a raw call, because, you know, when you see raw calls on a kill mail, don't initially expect that to be raw calls doing regular raw call stuff, because raw calls are used in a myriad of different ways.
Be the first and certainly won't be the last that falls to a battle raw call.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing that happened this week is that the April monthly economic report was released. And there was a very nice discussion on Matterall's daily Talking in Stations morning show. So you can, if you want to dig into that, I'd invite you to look back a couple episodes to grab one of those and watch the recording. You can get them from talkinginstations.com or from youtube.com/talkinginstations, all one word. Any other news that we should cover, guys?
The news I'm most interested is, about to come up. So, honestly, I haven't been paying too much attention aside from that.
I was there. I'm there thinking to myself, like, I'm definitely going to have to get this podcast out in like 24 hours. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth it. Like, everyone's going to be like, well, we could have used this information like 12 hours ago.
Pressure on you, McLeod. Thank you. Yeah, some work to do. I apologize.
That's all right.
It's definitely a tricky thing, considering that most of the info is just gleaned from hobo leaks, where we just, sure, we got bits and pieces, but we still don't have the whole picture or how everything is going to work. But all things considering, don't panic. It's not going to be all of it straight away. There's going to be a bit of a ramp up. Don't feel left out. You can still join in regardless of your situation, whether you're more into mining, building industry, or if you're more oriented towards combat, whether you're a young character or an old character. There's a lot of groups out there that got all sorts of programs that can help you get in on the action. So don't be afraid that you're missing out, or don't be afraid that you're not ready. There's plenty of people out there who will happily take you under their wings and run the content with you.
There is one other thing that happened, and it's quite significant. We shouldn't have actually gone past. Thank you very much, Astarothi, for mentioning it in chat. But PIRAT kind of somewhat imploded, or something seriously interesting happened with PIRAT just a little while ago.
There was a rumor, at least, that one of the directors got pissed off and just kicked all the corpse and had a meltdown. January reached out to a director and had a conversation about maybe doing a Sunday show about that. That conversation didn't lend itself to having a show based on the subject, but I'm glad we picked this subject instead. But yeah, the meltdown of PIRAT is definitely newsworthy this week.
And I will say, we actually did have a neat show, I think 3 weeks ago now, that had dead terrorists and talking about their campaign versus PIRAT and HiSec. And I do believe the outcome of that campaign may have led to some of the events that happened to PIRAT. From what I glean, the PIRAT director who went and just kicked everyone out was kind of embarrassed by PIRAT, by what PIRAT had become. So this is kind of we're going back to our roots sort of thing. It is so unbelievably profitable what they do, just ganking people in ISAC, that I'm sure there will be another incarnation of them somewhere down the line. In fact, I think there kind of already is with, I forget their name. I know it's not Inner Hell, but it's a name that sounds almost exactly the same. They do a lot of what PIRAT does.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. One thing I will say is that I do sort of wish that low security status actually had more of an effect. I mean, gank characters, they get to -10 and sort of and it doesn't really actually influence or prevent ganking at all. It's sort of okay, well, and
Held On. That's the group I was trying to think of. So if you get war decked by Held On, just don't go through Cheetah, Omar, or anything like that.
I'm pretty sure we're going to see Pirate return, based on. I'm not sure if it's leaked or if it was just published, but based on the tone in that message, it's more like, nope, this is not what we envisioned when we started it. This is not something we're happy with. So in a way, they became a victim of their own success because they were really good and they are really good at what they do. So there's always going to be people like, hey, this seems like something that's really profitable, or this is something that I want to get in on. So people are going to try to get in. They're going to get in. You're going to get other corps recruiting people that might not be willing to go the way that they had originally envisioned. It's certainly a very love them or hate them kind of situation when it comes to Pirate. They're good at what they do. I've been on the receiving end of their war decks on several occasions, so even though it's not fun, they're good at what they do. So I will definitely give them props for that. They find ways to use the system in their advantage without really breaking the game or really using anything that could be considered cheating. And they help balance certain things out. It's because of Pirate and things like Code where haulers go like, well, you can't move anything above a certain value in the ship because that's going to be a guaranteed gank.
I will say that Pirate do push the boundaries a little bit in terms of mechanics. I think they use some mechanics that aren't meant to be used the way they use them. But they're very good at just like an introduction to PvP, right? I think they're at the bottom rung of the PvP ladder in what they do. So it's a good way to introduce people into that aspect of the game.
Yet at the same time, I mean, sure, they're and I think you're referring to parking things in neutral bowhead. I think that's the one you're referring to, right?
Yeah.
Now, that is something to which I say I tip my hat to you, good sir. That's something that shows you know what the mechanics are about. That's something like, okay, we're in a tough spot. Do we have ways to minimize our losses, or is there a way we can still get things out? And they found it, so I say congratulations, well done. As frustrating as it can be if it's being used against you.
Oh, yeah, of course.
We'll leave Pirate for another day. But thank you for joining us today for a conversation about spaceships. Please join the conversation and extend it by joining our Talking in Stations Discord. There is a link for that on talkinginstations.com. Big thank you to our supporters on Patreon, YouTube, and twitch.tv who make this happen. Thank you much to our guests and to our hosts. And thank you to McLeod, who has a lot of work to do to get this podcast out in time to be useful this week. I appreciate all of you. That's all for this episode. Fly well.